At Thanksgiving this year in Savannah, 2024 warm air drifting through the screened porch and pecan pie cooling on the counter, my younger sister stood up, tapped her champagne flute, and made an announcement like she was accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. "Mom and Dad are signing the house over to me," she declared with a smug smile. "And Marina gets nothing." The room erupted instantly with cheers, whistles, and the kind of excitement usually reserved for sports victories. One of my uncles even clapped like he'd been waiting his whole life for that line. I didn't clap. I didn't blink. I simply smiled, the calm, dangerous smile you wear when you already know something they don't. I set my fork down and said softly, "Dad." The room shifted as the laughter faded. "Should I tell them?" I asked. "Or do you want to?" His face drained of color, and Lila, my 7-year-old sister, froze with her triumphant grin still half-formed. In that moment, everyone sensed something was wrong. But before I take you into what happened after that silence, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It helps to know there are people out there who've survived families like mine. My name is Marina Ellison. I'm 35. And if you'd met us before that Thanksgiving, you'd swear we were the picture of Southern warmth. We were the kind of perfect family people admire in Christmas cards, Spanish moss behind us, matching sweaters, smiles that covered entire histories of favoritism and neglect. Families like mine don't shatter loudly, they erode slowly. They fracture through quiet choices: who gets heard, who gets ignored, who gets protected, and who gets sacrificed. And I spent my whole life inside that quiet space where people only notice you when they need something. Lila never knew that space. She was the golden child from the moment she was born, bright, magnetic, adored. Relatives called her a natural, a spark, a leader, even when she'd done nothing but show up. I didn't resent her for it. She didn't build the pedestal they put her on. But I learned early that if I wanted anything: stability, opportunity, and respect, I'd have to create it myself. When I was 15, I asked my parents if I could join a photography workshop at the local art center. They told me we couldn't afford it. 2 days later, they enrolled Lila in a $900 cheer camp. When I earned a scholarship to the University of Georgia, they accused me of abandoning the family. When Lila moved 20 minutes away at 21, they paid her rent for 6 months, bought her furniture, and threw her a housewarming party. So I stopped asking, stopped expecting, stopped hoping they would ever treat us equally. By 30, I had built a design career in Atlanta, paid off my car, subleased a small loft, and returned to Savannah only for holidays. The truth is, I came home for one person: my grandmother, Eleanor Ellison. She was 81, sharp as a razor, her silver hair always tucked neatly behind her ears. She was the only one in the family who looked at me with genuine pride instead of disappointment. When she hugged me at the door, it never felt obligatory. It felt like acknowledgement. "You've built yourself well, sweetheart," she would say, brick by brick, and she always warned me years before that Thanksgiving. "One day your parents will make a choice that forces you to make one too." I didn't understand it then, but standing in that dining room, watching Lila bask in applause, I finally did. Because the truth, the part my sister didn't know when she announced her little triumph, was that my grandmother had already made her final choice. And she made it about me. While the family cheered for Lila, while they celebrated taking the house out from under me, while they laughed at my supposed loss, they had no idea what document was already tucked carefully inside my bag. They thought they were blindsiding me, but they were the ones standing in the dark. And when I pushed my chair back and stood from that table, they were moments away from learning the truth. Eleanor would tap my cheek the same way every holiday, lean in with that soft, knowing smile, and whisper, "You're stronger than they think, sweetheart." Then she'd slip back into her chair as if she hadn't just handed me enough fuel to survive another year in that house. But this Thanksgiving felt strange long before anyone said a word. The air inside the Ellison home carried a heaviness I couldn't name, thick, expectant, almost electric. It felt like everyone had been told a secret I wasn't supposed to hear. Mom moved around the kitchen with that tight little smile she uses when she's lying by omission. Dad avoided my eyes with suspicious precision, letting his gaze skim past me like I was a stranger. And Lila kept smoothing imaginary lint off her cranberry dress, even though it was spotless, her movements jittery and rehearsed. When I walked into the dining room, I noticed something else immediately. The empty chair beside mine was gone. Not shifted to another place at the table. Not pushed into a corner. Gone entirely, like it had been intentionally removed from the scene. I should have known then. In my family, the warnings are always quiet before the explosion. Still, I sat down and smoothed my napkin across my lap, pretending I didn't notice the way the room changed when I entered. Conversations dipped in volume for just a second, like someone pressed a mute button before springing back to life with forced laughter. Lila floated around as though she were the centerpiece of the evening, adjusting silverware angles, repositioning candles, whispering little comments to Mom that made them both smile. Every so often, she'd glance at me with a tight-lipped, brittle grin. Not hostile. Worse, indifferent. Like I was a polite inconvenience. It hadn't always been that way. When we were kids, Lila and I shared a bedroom, whispered secrets in the dark, passed notes under the door when we were supposed to be asleep. She used to braid my hair before school, steal my sweaters, beg me to drive her to the movies once I had a license. But somewhere between high school and adulthood, the shift happened. She stepped easily into the golden girl mold my parents created for her perfect daughter, dazzling future, family pride, while I faded softly out of the frame. She didn't push me out, they just pulled her closer. And the truth is, the house situation started 6 months earlier, long before the Thanksgiving announcement that would blow everything open. It was a humid Saturday in June when Mom called, asking me to come home for something important. No details, no hint, just that strained sweetness she uses when she wants something from me. When I arrived, they ushered me straight into the dining room, the same room where they'd later try to cut me out of the family home. Dad had a folder laid out neatly beside his iced tea, like he was preparing for a business presentation. Mom's smile was stretched so hard it looked brittle. "Sweetheart," Dad began, "we're refinancing the house. Just a simple signature. Better rates. You won't have to worry about a thing." Even then, something in me tightened. My family never asked me for help unless they needed more than they were willing to admit. I opened the folder and scanned the pages, heart thudding as I tried to make sense of all the numbers. Too many pages. Too many details blurred or blacked out. Too many explanations delivered too quickly. They wanted me to sign without thinking. "Can I take these with me?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Mom's smile wavered. Dad cleared his throat. Lila wasn't there that day, but now, looking back, I know exactly whose idea it had been. Because when I lifted those papers, I saw something that made the hairs on my arms rise. My name wasn't on them as a beneficiary. It was on them as collateral. And that was the moment I realized something was very, very wrong, long before Thanksgiving ever arrived. I told them calmly, "My attorney can look at these." The silence that followed told me everything. Mom's smile faltered like a curtain slipping off its hook. Dad snapped the folder shut too quickly, as if he suddenly regretted ever placing it in front of me. "It's just a formality," he insisted, voice too sharp. "Why complicate things?" But I took the folder anyway, tucked it into my bag, and drove back to Atlanta with a tightness in my chest that wouldn't release. When I got home, I sent everything to a lawyer I trusted. She flipped through the stack in her office, eyebrows rising higher with every page. She didn't smile. She didn't ask small questions or offer the soothing reassurances most attorneys default to. She simply said, "I'll call you tomorrow." She did. Early. "This isn't a refinance, Marina," she said. "It's a transfer of liability." I stared at my phone, unable to process the words for a moment. "Liability? What liability?" She explained slowly, carefully, like she was lowering me into cold water. A second mortgage, months of missed payments, foreclosure notices, escalating interest, an entire financial collapse I didn't know existed. If I signed, the debt would legally become mine. Every dollar, every late payment, every consequence. And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something colder. Sharper clarity. 2 months later, in August, Dad called again. This time, there was no pretense. He didn't ask for a loan. He didn't frame it as help. He asked for money. He said it was for Mom's medical bills, but when I offered to pay the hospital directly, he broke. His voice splintered, the story shifted, the truth leaked out in fragments. Overdue payments, credit lines maxed out, deadlines closing in. The same debt my lawyer had warned me about. And now, sitting at that Thanksgiving table in Savannah, watching my younger sister Lila glow under the warm praise of our relatives, the weight of those 2 months settled in my chest like a stone. They weren't giving her the house out of love or legacy. They were giving her the debt, handing her a sinking ship while expecting me to stay silent and stoic beside her. By November, the secret between my parents and me buzzed like a live wire. We did not discuss the folder I refused to sign. We did not mention Dad's unraveling confession on the phone. Our conversations shrank into shallow updates about weather, traffic, and work projects as if small talk could bury a crater. They didn't know I'd gone further. I'd pulled the county property records myself. I knew about the ballooning interest, the delinquency dates, the foreclosure timeline that was already ticking loudly in the background of their lives. My parents were drowning financially, and instead of reaching for a lifeline, they reached for someone to pull under with them. For most of my life, I assumed that someone was me. I was the responsible one, the one with a stable design career in Atlanta, the one without children or a spouse, an easy safety net in their eyes. Saying no to them felt unnatural, like learning a new language that tasted like guilt and defiance at the same time. Then Lila began posting hints online. Cryptic captions about big changes coming, photos on the porch with our parents, jokes about being ready to be a homeowner. Each post felt like another puzzle piece locking into place. She thought it was an honor, a milestone, a rite of passage. She had no idea what she was actually being handed. A week before Thanksgiving, Mom called me, practically breathless with excitement. She gushed about how thrilled Lila was to host more often once everything was settled with the house. She said it lightly, as if she were talking about passing down a family quilt, not wrapping a financial bomb in a decorative bow. And in that moment, I understood the full shape of their plan. Lila was never the beneficiary. She was the shield, the distraction, the one they thought would smile her way through disaster. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't the quiet girl in the shadows anymore, and I wasn't going to let them sacrifice her or me without the truth coming to light. Don't miss the moment the truth finally comes out. Hit subscribe, and I'll take you with me into the part of the story my family never saw coming. That was the night I stopped hoping my parents would somehow fix things on their own. Hope had always been the language of our family, silent, naive, and mostly one-sided. But that night, standing alone in my Atlanta apartment, the truth settled. They weren't confused, overwhelmed, or temporarily desperate. They were choosing this path. They were choosing to make me responsible for mistakes they refused to face. I went to my desk, pulled out a clean folder, and began filling it. Copies of every overdue notice I'd discovered, summaries of the missed payments, the second mortgage documents, the foreclosure timeline page after page that showed exactly how deep they were. I didn't print anything to shame them. I printed it because I was done being the only person who knew the truth while everyone else played along with their fantasy. On Thanksgiving morning, I drove back to Savannah with that folder in my bag and a knot tightening beneath my ribs. A small part of me still wanted to believe my parents would pull me aside, admit the plan had spiraled out of control, and tell me they were sorry. Instead, Mom opened the door with a tight hug that smelled like too much perfume and nerves stretched thin. "You look beautiful," she said. "Lila is going to be so happy you're here." Not we. Not we're happy you're here. Just Lila. Inside, the dining room was already staged for the evening, extra leaves in the table, the good glasses shining, every chair filled except mine. My grandmother, Eleanor, caught my eye from her usual seat. She gave me a small, steady nod, the kind that said she knew more than she was allowed to reveal. As I slid into my place, my hand brushed the edge of my bag. Paper against canvas, evidence against denial. If my family wanted to turn this dinner into a performance, then I was done pretending to be the silent extra in their play. So when my sister Lila rose from her seat, tapped her glass, and looked around the room with glowing anticipation, I already knew the opening act had begun. Her hair was curled perfectly, her dress pressed to perfection, and around her neck hung the delicate gold pendant our grandmother gave her, the same pendant she insisted I wasn't responsible enough to wear at her age. "Mom and Dad are signing the house over to me," Lila announced brightly, her voice carrying like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "Marina gets nothing." The room erupted. Cheers, loud claps, a couple of whistles. The kind of congratulatory laughter people use when they're convinced they're celebrating something good. Someone even slapped my father on the back, telling him, "About time." My mother dabbed the corner of her eye like she was watching a proposal. My father exhaled shakily but tried to mask it behind a proud smile. I didn't touch my glass. I didn't twitch. I didn't blink. Instead, I looked directly at my sister and smiled, not warmly, not wide. Just enough to let her feel a shift she couldn't yet name the weight of everything I wasn't saying. Then I set my fork down gently and turned to my father. "Should I tell them?" I asked softly. "Or would you prefer to?" The effect was instant, like I had sliced through a wire no one knew was holding the room up. Silence crashed over the table so hard I could hear the radiator tick against the wall. Dad's hand slipped. His fork hit the plate with a metallic clatter that echoed through the stunned dining room. Lila's expression tightened into the first flicker of uncertainty. "Tell us what?" she asked, voice thinner than before. Around us, relatives leaned forward, scenting the beginning of a spectacle. My grandmother exhaled sharply, as if she'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to finally stop pretending. Without speaking, I reached into my bag, pulled out the bulging folder, and placed it on the table in front of me. The truth, inch by inch, was finally coming into the light. I didn't open the folder yet. I simply let it rest on the table between us, quiet and unmoving like a threat no one wanted to acknowledge. "Before you celebrate Lila getting the house," I said calmly, projecting my voice just enough for the room to hear, "you should probably understand the condition it's actually in." "ATA." Dad tried to recover with a laugh that fell flat. "Marina, not here." "Why not?" I asked. "You weren't embarrassed when you decided to sign it over to her without telling her about the debt." The word debt cut through the room like a blade. Heads turned. Conversations died. My mother's smile twitched and collapsed. Lila stiffened instantly, as though someone had pulled an invisible string too tight inside her ribs. "What debt?" she snapped, voice sharp enough to crack glass. That was when I opened the folder. A stack of overdue notices, past due statements, interest summaries, and foreclosure warnings stared back at us. I slid one page forward so everyone could see the bolded summary line. "They're behind on payments," I said. "Not one mortgage, two. And the second one was taken out without telling anyone. They're months from foreclosure, maybe weeks." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face reddened like he'd been caught stealing in church. Lila blinked so fast she looked disoriented, like the room had suddenly tilted under her feet. "That's not true," she insisted, her voice rising. "They would have told me." "Did they tell you?" I asked, locking eyes with her. "That the house comes with over $100,000 in debt? Did they tell you that if you sign the transfer papers, you inherit every overdue payment and every penalty attached to it?" Something in her expression cracked just a hairline fracture, but enough. Doubt crept in along the edges, softening her anger into a flash of fear. Dad tried again. "You're making this sound worse than it is, Marina. We're handling it." "Are you?" I held up another page. "Because according to this notice, the bank isn't convinced you're handling anything." Dad lunged forward, like he could snatch the document out of my hand in front of 20 witnesses. I pulled it back before he could touch it. "Stop!" Mom begged, her voice catching. "Please, not today." "One? Why not?" I asked. "You chose today." Relatives shifted in their seats, some uncomfortable, some intrigued, others visibly angry at being dragged into the family crisis they didn't know they were walking into. My Aunt Diane was the first brave soul to break the tension. "Daniel," she said sharply to my father, "is this true?" Dad didn't answer. His jaw locked so tightly I thought something inside him might snap. Mom buried her face in her napkin like a child hiding under a blanket. Lila looked between them and me, eyes darting. "But they said the house was mine," she whispered, sounding young in a way I hadn't heard in years. "It was never a gift," I said softly. but firmly. It was an escape route for them. They needed someone, anyone to carry the debt. I tapped the folder lightly. First, they tried to trick me. Lila swallowed hard, her lipstick trembling at the edges. So, they were going to dump all of this on me? I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The silence answered for me. Behind Lila, our grandmother Eleanor exhaled with a kind of resigned sadness, her gaze heavy but unsurprised, as if she had known this moment was coming long before the rest of us caught up. And for the first time that entire night, I saw it land on Lila, not just the betrayal, but the realization that she'd never been chosen out of love. She'd been chosen out of convenience. Lila stood frozen in her emerald sequined dress, the sparkle suddenly too bright for the girl wearing it. Her entire body trembled, not with anger, but with a kind of stunned terror, the kind that comes when the floor drops out beneath you. Her fiancé, Tyler, who had been smiling proudly beside her minutes earlier, leaned away slightly, as though unsure whether he still belonged in this picture. "Is she lying?" he asked my parents, pointing at me but never taking his eyes off them. My mother burst into tears, mascara streaking nearly instantly. My father didn't even lift his gaze. That was enough for Tyler. He pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the wood floor. "You told me the house was paid off," he said, voice cracking between disbelief and fury. "You said we'd have a clean start." Lila reached for him, fingers trembling, but he stepped back like her touch might burn. "You expect me to start a life on a sinking ship?" he said. $100,000 of debt, Lila, without telling me?" "Tyler, please," she begged, but he shook his head, jaw clenched so tightly the muscle jumped. "I'm not marrying into this." The room gasped collectively. Tyler walked out past the turkey, past the stunned relatives, past my parents, who looked as though their world was dissolving, straight out the front door without looking back. Lila's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair, hands shaking uncontrollably, mascara smudging into dark shadows beneath her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, whispering that she didn't want to be alone. "This isn't my fault," she breathed in a broken whisper. "I didn't know." "I know," I said softly. Because it was true. She had been lied to just as surely as I had. Dad slammed his palm onto the table. "You ruined everything," he snarled at me. I stared back at him, unshaken. "No," I said quietly. "You ruined everything the minute you tried to hand your debt to your children like it was an inheritance." "You're tearing this family apart," Mom sobbed. "It was already broken," I replied. "I'm just refusing to keep sweeping the pieces under the rug." A murmur rippled across the table. Agreement, disappointment, judgment, shock. The kind of reaction that stings more because it comes from people who finally saw what had been happening all along. Then my grandmother, Eleanor, stood slowly, using the table for balance. Though her voice was thin, it carried more authority than anyone else's in the room. "I taught you better than this," she said to my father. "Your daughters are not lifeboats for you to climb into." Dad shrank, truly shrank, like a man half his size. Mom wept harder. Lila lifted her head, eyes hollow. "What do I do now?" she whispered. The question pierced deeper than she intended, not because I had the answer, but because, for the first time, she was asking me, not the parents who built her illusions, not the family who raised her to ignore consequences. Me, the sister who had spent years alone in the shadows. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the door. Hard. The whole room froze. Another knock echoed, louder. Dad frowned and stood, confused. He opened the door, and a woman stepped inside. Plain suit, badge clipped to her belt, calm, unreadable expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Ellison?" she asked. "I need to speak with you regarding your mortgage records." The room erupted again, but this time in disbelief so sharp it felt like a physical blow. Mom nearly collapsed. Dad turned sheet white. Lila grabbed the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I didn't move. I just sat there, breathing slowly, finally watching the truth land where it belonged. "Why is she here?" Dad whispered, voice trembling. The investigator didn't blink. "We received a report of potential financial misconduct," she said. "I have a few questions." You could have heard a pin drop. No one cheered now. "Marina," Mom begged through sobs. Tell her you misunderstood, please. I didn't answer. Not yet, because the truth was only beginning to unfold. The investigator stepped fully inside, asking calm, precise questions about payments, overdue notices, the second mortgage, the refinancing attempt, the foreclosure timeline. Every answer my parents avoided made the air grow heavier. Relatives backed away from them, as if stepping back from an open flame. Lila sat motionless, hands trembling in her lap. She wasn't angry anymore. She looked emptied out, as though someone had drained every color from her world in an instant. My grandmother stood behind her, resting one steady hand on her shoulder, silent but present. When the investigator finally left, taking copies of the documents with her, the house fell into a silence so deep it swallowed the echoes. Mom reached for me. Dad muttered that I had embarrassed them. Neither apology nor blame landed. I stood, slipping into my coat. Lila whispered, "Don't go." "I'll still be here," I told her gently. "Just not for their lies anymore. If it's plans." In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. My parents were forced to confront what they'd built, layer after layer of secrecy, excuses, and debt. The house went up for sale. They moved into a small apartment across the city, quieter than they had ever been. No more grand announcements, no more illusions of stability, no more golden child favoritism. Lila started therapy. She called me often, sometimes to cry, sometimes just to sit in silence with someone who finally understood. She told me she now saw clearly why I stopped letting our parents speak for me, why I left, why I refused to carry a burden that was never mine. And as for me, I learned something I should have known years ago. Telling the truth isn't betrayal. Hiding it is. And families built on denial always collapse eventually. If you've ever carried the weight of a family's mistakes on your shoulders, I hope my story reminds you that silence isn't strength. Comment below, tell me what you would have said at that table, because standing up alone is easier when you know others understand. And here's what I learned the hard way. Love doesn't mean letting people drain you. Set boundaries, even if your voice shakes. Protect your peace, your future, and your worth. You deserve a life built on honesty, not obligation.